Welcome to the JCPS MTSS training on the Feedback Toolkit with a focus on the high yield practice opportunities to respond. I am Melissa Logston, MTSS Engagement Resource Teacher with Elementary Zone 3.
Hi, I'm April Bemker, MTSS Engagement Resource Teacher with the Accelerated Improvement Schools Zone, working with middle and high schools.
Please take a moment to type the case-sensitive bit.ly into your web browser. This will allow you access to all the links for the activities offered throughout the presentation. Here you will see the 6 components that make up the MTSS department or multi-tiered systems of support. MTSS focuses on overall school improvement by aligning resources and support for both teachers and students. We provide multiple levels of support for learners that address academic, social, emotional, and behavioral needs, and produce professional development that is aligned with schools and the district as a whole. JCPS has 3 departments within MTSS, as shown on this concept map. MTSS Academics, directed by Donna Lawson, supports schools by ensuring teachers are providing all students with academic supports, with a focus on Tier 2 and Tier 3 interventions and support. MTSS Behavior Department, directed by Sandra Hensel, supports schools in implementing school-wide behavior systems and frameworks, including positive behavior interventions and support, and the Behavior Support Systems Model, which is an alignment of PBIS and restorative practices. Our department is MTSS Engagement, directed by Dr. Naomi Brahim. The goal of the MTSS Engagement Department is to increase student achievement by equipping teachers with high-yield pedagogical practices to maximize student engagement. 6 MTSS toolkits were created to provide resources for Tier 1 instructional practices to increase student engagement, reduce student behaviors, and to decrease disproportionality. Here are the 6 MTSS toolkits. By clicking the toolkit image, you will access the MTSS department webpage and each toolkit. The feedback toolkit includes high-yield practices that show feedback is information provided by an agent about aspects of one's performance or understanding. The most powerful form of feedback comes when teachers seek feedback from students as to what they know, understand, and where they have misconceptions. Successful implementation of this instructional practice is observed when teachers are providing frequent, purposeful, and intentional OTRs through a variety of student responses. OTRs help drive student-centered learning by facilitating individual, peer-to-peer, and whole group cognitive engagement through verbal, nonverbal, and written responses. Today, we are going to dive into the high-yield instructional practice of opportunities to respond, or OTR. An OTR is the interaction between a teacher's academic prompt and a student's response. The teacher asks a question or gives a prompt, and the student or students respond. The student response then allows the teacher to not only formatively assess student learning, but also provide specific feedback to the student. Within this session, we will examine features and different types of opportunities to respond. The success criteria for today will be to think about how you can use a variety of OTRs in your classroom. I'm going to read you a scenario. I would like for you to count how many times the teacher gives students an opportunity to respond. Also, think about the various strategies the teacher is using to get students to respond. Shortly after science class started, the teacher announced, "We have a small block of ice and the same sized block of butter. Tell your neighbor which one would melt first." A few seconds later, the teacher said, "Please write down in one sentence an explanation for your answer." A few minutes later, the teacher told students to share with their neighbor what they had written. Shortly thereafter, the teacher called on one student to tell the class her answer. The teacher then asked the class to raise their hand if they agreed with the answer. Then the teacher asked students to give a thumb down if anyone disagreed, and so on. In this scenario, students had an opportunity to respond 6 times. The different strategies used are talk to a neighbor, individual verbal response, and nonverbal response. Notice how the teacher was able to incorporate a variety of intentional opportunities for students to respond in just a portion of the lesson. With planning, you can incorporate multiple OTRs to increase student engagement and allow you to check for understanding. When thinking about features of OTRs, we need to strive for all students to participate. Use wait time of 3 to 5 seconds before students respond to increase participation. Also, use clear, consistent prompts to elicit responses effectively. In addition to having multiple OTRs, feedback must also be provided to have a significant impact on academic and behavioral outcomes. Some keys to success to remember are to write specific OTRs in your lesson plans prior to instruction. Have routines and structures in place that allow for OTRs to be a positive experience. And last, be strategic about seating arrangements for pairing students. It's important to note when planning for some of the more involved opportunities to respond, it is helpful to introduce the new engagement strategy with non-academic content to model and let the students explore the strategy in order to understand how it works prior to using content. 3 ways that teachers can use OTRs are to engage students individually, one at a time, as a whole group or unison response, or peer-to-peer small group. OTRs may require a verbal response, a nonverbal response, such as a gesture or a movement, or a written response. Some OTRs encompass more than one type of response and more than one way to engage students. For example, a Think, Ink, Pair, Share is both individual written and peer-to-peer verbal. During the 2019-2020 school year, members of the MTSS department observed several classrooms across JCPS looking for OTRs. 198 elementary classrooms, 59 in middle school, and 209 classrooms from the high school zone. Each classroom observed was 6 minutes long. As you can see, the most frequent OTR observed across all levels are individual verbal opportunities. The most infrequent OTR observed was any type of peer-to-peer response. As we plan lessons, we should think about increasing opportunities for student-to-student discourse as a way to engage the entire class with the content being presented.
Now we are going to take a look at the 3 different types of OTRs. Let's first discuss verbal response strategies. This is when we want students to respond orally to the prompt or question. We have provided some examples of verbal OTRs to get you thinking about what you can use in your classroom. While we won't explain everyone in detail now, there is a document on our resources slide at the end of this presentation that includes descriptions for all of these strategies. The most common form of OTR that teachers use is the first one listed, to call on students individually, and sometimes only calling on students who volunteer. Melissa also just mentioned this in the previous slide, that it's the most common we saw in JCPS classrooms as well. While this is an opportunity to respond, it's important to incorporate a wide variety of opportunities to respond that require all students to respond in some way, as Melissa mentioned earlier. This helps increase student engagement and also allows you multiple ways to check for understanding and formatively assess learning for all students, not just those who volunteer to respond. One easy one that doesn't take much planning is choral responding, where all students say the same thing at the same time. Whip around or pass is also an easy one to implement that gives students a chance to share an answer or pass. This is for open-ended questions or prompts that have multiple possible answers or responses. You could have students write down as many responses as possible and then whip around the room, calling on one student at a time. Have students share one of their responses, and when called on, students should not repeat an earlier response. They must add something new. Consider giving students who passed a second opportunity to share an answer after they've heard all the other student responses. The last item listed is quiz, quiz, trade. We're going to watch a video that shows this strategy being used with vocabulary. It can also be used with short answer content-based questions.
We have lots of good new vocabulary to review before we get into our science talk. And the way we're going to review them today is with our quiz, quiz, trade protocol. When our scholars are engaging in quiz, quiz, trade, we ask them to find a partner, and they each have a card. On that card is one of our vocab words as well as a definition.
Quantity that donates ability to push, pull, or twist. Force. Yes.
They're reading only the definition to each other and waiting for the other scholar to respond with the word.
Educated guess. Hypothesis. Okay, you do that. Supersteam was a slanted surface used to raise or lower objects. Inclined plane? Yes. That was good.
And then they will switch cards and go around the room and find someone else who's looking for a new vocab word as well.
If their partner's struggling with what that vocabulary word is, we try to encourage our scholars to ask for a hint. Say, I need help, or can you give me a clue?
Can I get a hint? It's something that you go up instead of like stairs.
A ramp.
Okay.
After maybe 2 hints and they're still struggling, it's okay to give them that word. Tell them what that word is, help them to understand this is what it means, maybe read the definition again.
For our students with visual impairments, we make sure that our cards are brailled, so they'll have the print and brailled on there so that they are able to engage and go around the classroom and pick a variety of partners. They're not secluded to only working with each other. Quiz Quiz Trade helps our scholars learn by exposing them to many vocabulary words. Whether you're reading or you're guessing, you're benefiting from hearing that vocab, reading its definition.
As you're sharing and trying to teach them about the word, you're also getting a deeper understanding of what that word means. They're able to then take those words that they've heard and they understand and actually apply them by using them in their writing. So it's a constant reinforcement of that higher level vocabulary that goes along with whatever the content is that they're studying. And it involves movement. So for scholars who have a hard time sitting, you're not sitting, you're moving. You're constantly engaged with somebody different.
Nonverbal strategies have every student actively responding by using a signal, card, or movement to respond to the prompt or question. This slide includes some of the most common ones, such as simple hand signals like thumbs up, thumbs down, moving to one of 4 corners based on response to a question, and using dry erase boards. As you can see, response cards can take many different forms and can be used throughout a lesson in a variety of ways. You can prepare specific pre-printed cards in advance, or you could even just use colored slips of paper or have students use a colored marker on a slip of paper such as a green square for yes and a red square for no. In this next video, we will see one way you could use response cards with your students.
So at this point, we're going to share our responses. Remember to use your participation cards. So participation cards are a set of index cards which have labels on them. I agree, I disagree, or I don't know how to respond. We use them to assess students' understanding, but we also use them to give students voice. So I first pose a question. What was the summary of this excerpt?
The summary of these 2 pages is that Mrs. Wise is setting Jasmine up to fail.
Scholars will listen to the responses and then they will use their participation cards.
I respectfully disagree with you. What can the reader infer about Miss Wise based on paragraph 2?
We obviously cannot have 24 scholars speaking at the same time, but we want everyone to feel their ideas matter. Even if I am very shy and I don't feel comfortable, my voice was still heard.
Written opportunities to respond are the third way to get student responses. This is where students would be responsible to write their thoughts and answers based on the prompt or question. As mentioned earlier, you could use written OTRs in conjunction with verbal OTRs and allow students to discuss with a partner, small group, or even whole group. Quick writes are great to use at any point in a lesson or series of lessons to quickly assess students' prior knowledge, check for current level of understanding, or allow students to reflect on their learning. They can also be used as a way for students to analyze their own metacognitive thinking processes. Insight and question, or IQ cards, allow students to share 2 things: a new important specific insight and a question they have about the content. Students write these on an index card without their name and stand in a large circle. Then you have students pass their cards to the person on their right and do that 4 to 5 times to increase anonymity. Then students read the card they've been given and pass it to the person next to them. Continue this process of reading and passing until students get their own card back. As a whole group, discuss commonalities and common questions. You can have students write their names on their cards and collect them to check for understanding. For the biggest aha bar graph, students record their biggest ahas on a quick write half sheet or an index card or a Post-it note, or you could have pre-cut pieces of paper that are all the same size. Have one student share his or her response, then tape it to the wall or board, and then ask students who selected the same or similar response to come up, share their responses, and tape them above the other student's response, forming the first column of the bar graph. Ask another student who didn't already share to come up, share his or her response, and tape it to the wall in a new column. Have students with the same or similar responses come up and complete the second column. Repeat this process until all students have posted their responses on the bar graph. At the end, you can tell which concepts made the biggest impact and which ones need revisited. This next video will explain another strategy called Chalk Talk.
The protocol that I used in my classroom today is Chalk Talk. It is a discussion protocol that allows every student in the classroom to be heard.
I like the Chalk Talk idea of us being able to comment silently on whatever we wanted to. The good thing about it is that everybody got a voice and we each got to put our ideas out.
I thought that it was less time consuming because if everybody wanted to share, it would take the whole class time.
Everybody gets to say what they want to say without talking over each other or a person not getting a chance to say anything.
I not only have the students answer the questions, but I have them comment back to each other. That's important too with the Chalk Talk. Whoever wrote this comment, they might not have felt comfortable in doing so in a verbal discussion, but they were able to in the Chalk Talk.
That one person got to fix that other person's mistake instead of everyone correcting that person and putting that person on the spot.
I was able to put many
stars and question marks on people's papers.
So they may star something that they agree with, question mark something they don't understand, or write an actual comment. And that allows for a conversation between students where they may be able to deepen their understanding or push each other's thinking without me.
It's really helpful to get everyone's idea out because everyone has a voice.
Okay, 2 more minutes. The goal of Chalk Talk is to put students in the driver's seat so that they're learning with each other instead of just with me. All right, if you have not made it back to your seat yet, please do so. At the end of my lesson, it's important for me to look at each of these posters. I'll take a look at what students wrote, specifically any misconceptions that I'm seeing, and that's what I'll focus my future lessons on. I wanted to be able to hear all of your opinions, which normally doesn't happen if we have a class discussion. And if you look on the board, I'm going to review all the information and determine the next steps for our learning tomorrow. I thank you so much today.
On this slide, we've included some additional video examples of OTRs. As mentioned earlier, you can refer to the OTR list of ideas document found on our resources slide at the end of this slide deck for more information on any of the strategies listed on the previous slides or included on this slide. In any classroom, the teacher should be aware of certain considerations regarding the environment or learning community that they are helping to create. Knowing the backgrounds or cultural norms for students within the classroom will lead to more engaging and effective instructional practice. Research we discussed earlier reinforced the use of a variety of purposeful, intentional opportunities to respond to engage students, and they also are essential to having a culturally responsive classroom. Giving students opportunities to respond, especially with dialogue, validating their contributions, and providing them with feedback helps to remove barriers and move learning forward. In classrooms where ECE students are present, use of opportunities to respond with your students should occur more often based upon the needs of the learners there. Planning for and providing multiple means of engagement, especially OTRs, coupled with feedback, is one means to accelerate learning. Using OTRs to formatively assess and adjust instruction or provide additional support and scaffolds where needed is a cornerstone to quality instruction with all students, but especially ECE students. When considering project-based learning, feedback is critical to student success, both from the teacher to the student and from student to the teacher. Opportunities to respond is one way to gather feedback and to identify areas where structured supports and explicit instruction are needed throughout the PBL process. We've provided you with a planning tool that can be used in your PLC to assist you in implementing a variety of intentional response strategy more frequently in your classroom instruction. Please refer to this slide for resources you might need. The last 2 linked items include descriptions of many different OTRs. If you would like more information about the MTSS toolkits and other high yield practices, please visit our department website. Thanks for attending our session about opportunities to respond. Have a great day.